Hey, psych kids, we're getting well into this COVID thing. I mean, adjust this light again. It's there's insecurity with making all these videos. When you're 53 years old, you start to think you look about 100 on camera. And for the most part, I think I do look 100 at this point. But just a quick note. I know these are tough times, man. I understand it's hard on you kids. I'm hearing more and more about how tough it is on you kids, and always remember, you can email me at any time, and I'll get right back to you, man. I really don't have much going on. And I might as well I mean, I have a graduate degree in psychology, so I might as well, use it if there's some coping mechanisms. Tell that to your parents too, man. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm happy to help out with any insight I can provide. I mean, I'm sure they could probably find it online or whatever, but sometimes it's just nice to talk to someone about stuff. So, and I'm doing pretty well. I mean, I have an 11-year-old, so when you have an 11-year-old, you're able to kind of make that the priority, and so that's what we've been doing, getting my little guy through his school, and he has like 4 hours of school a day. But remember, man, your teachers are here for you, your counselors are here for you, and I mean, I'm for sure here for you. If you feel like I can help you in any way, just reach out. 24/7 office hours. Anyway, I got a request for a little more on the dream interpretation stuff. So I'll just kind of touch on that before I get into the drug stuff. So dreams are an interesting part of our unconscious conscious relationship, and as you know, Freud kind of attributed most of the dream stuff to psychosexual wish fulfillment. And he did one of the things I think he did a brilliant job with was he in breaking down the dream content to manifest and latent categories. And I think that's, whatever you think about Freud's dream stuff, I really like that. I like the whole idea of the symbols of dreams are the manifest content, and what those symbols actually are meant to represent is the latent content. And his explanation being that the goal is to get us to confront our unconscious, and in his case, wish fulfillment, via sleep, where there's a lot of access to the unconscious. And that's very important from a Freudian or a Jungian or this is all depth psychology. This is the acknowledgement that the unconscious mind is a prevalent player in our existence. Freud, Jung, Adler, Erickson, they all were depth psychologists. There's many more, but those are just a few of them. So, that latent content is what you're trying to analyze when you're analyzing a dream. Now, with Freud, his symbols are really straightforward, and the male phallus is anything longer than it is wide. Swords, and that have sort of a male, connotation. I think you're seniors. I think you kind of get the whole idea there. And the female, is a little more difficult. The cave, which represents the genitalia and the womb, things like bottles, boxes, trunks, jars. The breasts would be more in the, Freud always said like apples and peaches and stuff like that. You know, take it for what it's worth. I don't do a whole lot of Freudian dream interpretation because it's I like his ideas regarding sometimes it's pretty obvious with Freud. Sometimes dreams are pretty clearly sexual, and you wake up and you're like, and it was sexual, but you can't understand why it was sexual. That's where you would go to Freud, quite possibly. Most of the dream stuff that I do deals with Jung. And as I mentioned earlier in the last session, was Jung deals with he broke it down into the personal and the collective unconscious. So the manifest content in Jung's dreams, are for him the symbols of what he called individuation. So you have to look at dreams from Jung's perspective, not as wish fulfillment, though there's some wish fulfillment in there, but more as he believed that when you went to sleep or when you confronted the unconscious, the symbols that were being presented to you were designed to help you on what he called this hero's journey to individuation. Okay, and the symbols in those dreams typically represented components of the unconscious. Sorry for taking a sip. Now, to understand those symbols, you would have to take a look at what are the prevalent parts of the unconscious. Well, the dark side of our unconscious, that valley of death that one of those Lord of the Ring guys has to go through, would be the shadow. And the shadow is that visceral dark part of our psyche that rears its head when we start to, like if you think Jung called something like the Nazi Party this collective shadow projection. And he said that the shadow presents to us a test. And the test, it's an important part of our psyche, because we must confront this dark side of our psyche as a very important part of the individuation process. So in the dream, you may be confronting something terrifying. Okay? Now, what is it that's terrifying to you? And very often it's abstract. So you're, in essence, when you get a symbol, like, let's say it's like a Freddy Krueger type character from Nightmare on Elm Street. That's dating myself. You kids probably haven't even seen that. What it is with Jung, you're always confronting parts of yourself. Okay? And this process of confronting the parts of yourself, like the shadow, lend themselves to individuation. So let's say you are forced to navigate a valley of ghosts and death, like in Lord of the Rings. Well, this would be, to Jung, this would be you confronting the darker elements of your psyche and seeing them and acknowledging them and moving forward with them, not as an adversary, but as something you have confronted. Okay? And this is like this is all over Lord of the Rings, because I'm sorry, I forget the names of them. I haven't read these books since I was a little kid, but like, Sauron or what, like these are shadow characters. That represent what every man has in there, every woman has in them, is this dark side. And this dark side isn't there, according to Jung, to make your life miserable. This dark side, much like the Christian tradition of darkness is necessary for light, this darkness is necessary for your process of individuation, according to Jung. We also confront the anima, which is the female component of the male unconscious, and the animus, which is the male component of the female. And so we will confront our female side in our dreams. Now, what does that mean? I mean, well, first of all, Jung's interpretation of the anima in men, or the animus in women, was that it is an important part of our existence because it brings us into contact, into touch with the parts of our psyche that are a little more foreign to us, and we have to reconcile them. But at the same time, like, the Jung cautioned, men and women, he cautioned, do not become obsessed with the anima or the animus, because it's there as to help you, but just like the shadow, it can manipulate your life if you allow it to take over. Jung used the example of a midlife crisis. In classic male midlife crisis, the male goes and gets a fast car and marries someone much younger than them. Jung was like, this is a classic example of the anima becoming too powerful in the male. So sometimes you will confront the female part of you in your dreams, and that female part of you may be challenging. You may have to have a sword fight with what are the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon? Well, a powerful female that you have to battle. Now, what is happening here is you are confronting your female side, okay, and you are sort of taming it, not making it something you can use without it wreaking havoc in your existence. Same with confronting that male side, that animus. You often will have adversarial males in your dreams if you're a woman, dangerous males in your dreams. That Jung said that was very common, and that was you confronting that male side or that female side and learning how to deal with it. Okay? The child, and we get to certain symbols like the child. The child, according to Jung, was always your true self, like this infant or small child, open to discovery in the world, and the child was rearing to explore the world. This is yourself telling you, hey, look. Your true self is constantly combating in the unconscious. Combating is not the word I want to use, but it's dealing with the shadow. It's confronting the female or male side to see what is useful and what is mischievous. And the child, will be prominent in your dreams as a representative of the self and the developing self. That's the key with Jung. And your ego, the persona, how does the ego present itself? Well, in dreams, remember that with Jung, the idea was to align the self with the ego. So we have a who we want to be, and you'll dream. The symbols will show up. You'll be, your ego will take over and make you like some kind of race car driver or whatever. And maybe the race car driver is, you have this dream that you're racing cars, and which is like this ego driven thing, and then you go off a cliff, and it's like, well, look, this is your ego, this is the persona, and it's not who you are. It's who you are trying to represent yourself as. And Jung would say that and I'm making this up as I fly, that going over the cliff shows you the limitations of the persona and the ego. And maybe you go over the cliff and a child walks up the hill. Ooh, look at that. The process of individuation. So, that's a little more on dreams. I'm sorry I didn't go fully into it. It's always fun when in class we're able to, and hopefully we'll go back for a week even, and we can just spend that time, you giving me dreams and me analyzing those dreams from a Jungian perspective. Let's get a little into drugs. Again, I think every time I say that it comes out wrong. Let's talk about, do I have food all over? Oh my God, I'm a mess, kids. But in all fairness, let's talk about what the role of drugs are. I woke up this morning and I had 5 shots of caffeine. Okay, that's one down from my 6 shots. And I will, let's a hypothetical person, because I'm not, let's say the hypothetical person wakes up, they get some coffee and they smoke a couple cigarettes or vape. Okay? Later in the afternoon, they have a cup of tea, some kombucha, okay? And then at night, to relax, they have a couple glasses of wine. Well, what I have just hypothetically presented to you is what could be seen as average drug use in contemporary times. Okay? Many of the drugs, like stimulants, which are caffeine and nicotine, 2 of our stimulants, are used every day. People use caffeine and nicotine every day. And one of the things, and alcohol, a depressant, is used every day by many, especially with, like, if you read the research on what's happening with alcohol during this COVID stuff, it's pretty terrifying. I myself have been trying to exercise moderation. I love having a beer or 2 at night, a couple nights a week. Yes, that couple nights a week is probably at 4 now, but I'm keeping the moderation, because I don't think alcohol is a depressant. And I'm not saying these are depressing times, but they're challenging times. Anyway, so there's a classic example of everyday drug use. And I had to quit caffeine for a while, and it was a long while. And it was when you quit caffeine, what's called withdrawal. That's a term, withdrawal. The withdrawal from quitting something like caffeine is awful. And caffeine is a drug that acts on you from an addiction standpoint, from a psychological standpoint, and a physiological standpoint. That's important. Not all drugs act on you that way. Something like the hallucinogens, which are things like mescaline and DMT and marijuana and lysergic acid, diethylamide, LSD. These drugs are more psychologically addictive. Your body does not go through withdrawals. Now, the reason for the withdrawals from something like caffeine and nicotine, and by the way, that makes it much harder to quit. Depressants, alcohol, you will experience withdrawals as well. This makes them much harder to quit because your physiology has incorporated them into a new homeostasis. Okay? Now, we know what homeostasis is. It's the chemical balance, physical balance of the body. Well, when you are pumping your body through full of caffeine or nicotine or alcohol, your body starts to incorporate that into its normal processes. This is why certain things like alcohol, we can't make you just quit because cold turkey, because you could die from that. An alcoholic could feasibly die from quitting, from withdrawal. That's what addiction does to you. And it's it's a good family friend of mine, Dr. Ed Kansian. He was a doctor at he was the head of the Harvard psychology department, and he wrote a book, fascinating, called Addiction and the Vulnerable Self. And in it, he does a remarkable job talking about how that physiological addiction to a drug, alcohol, and it didn't matter what the drug was. If it was a drug that brought about physical addiction, he was talking about it. But that physical part of it, when combined with the psychological part, makes drugs very difficult to quit. Opioids are brutal to quit because there's a psychological addiction because of the release of chemicals that are pleasing, dopamine and serotonin, and then the physiological connection to the drug, which the body starts to acclimate to opioids being in the system. And there's a new homeostasis. Okay? The body has incorporated the drug into the normal state. Okay? This is the real danger. Now, when we look at this, we look at what are the possibilities of addiction. Well, they did a study a long time ago. The likelihood of addiction if you use a drug one time. I think it's one time. Sub 10 or one time. Marijuana is at 9%. Alcohol is at 15%. Heroin is at 25%. And tobacco is at 32% likelihood of addiction. Now, there's a lot of factors in that. Because think about it, at the point you start to use heroin, it's usually out of depression, anxiety. So it has a very high addiction rate because it's alleviating something that you perceived as worse than addiction. And that's an important part of all this. The idea that most people don't turn to drugs because they're happy. Most people turn to drugs because they are struggling. And that's why we have done remarkable work in terms of creating a whole category of drugs that are, yes, very addictive on a physical and psychological level, but much safer. And that is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors that are designed to try to prevent people with severe anxiety and depression from turning to drugs that are very, very dangerous, like opioids and any drug in that category. So anyway, uh, there's a little intro with some dreams and some drugs. And I'll get into the specifics, but I see that I'm at 25 minutes, so I'll get into the specifics on this. There's no rush, and remember, if you're needing to talk to me, contact me. And I just did another Zoom, had a couple people jump in a psych Zoom. My next Zoom will be I'm trying to get my girls class together for a Zoom. And they're not mandatory, but I love hearing from you. I love talking to you. So anyway, stay safe.